The phone rang once before he picked it up. Lee Tae-Ho didn't wait for greetings. He spoke the way he did everything, directly, without wasted motion, with the quiet certainty of a man who had never once been told no. "You've been working on a story for 14 months, he said. "I know every source you've spoken to. I know every document you've requested. I know what you had for breakfast the morning you filed your third municipal records request." A pause. "I'm prepared to make this very worth your while. Name a number. Whatever it is, I'll double it. You'll never have to chase a story you don't want again." Silence on the other end. He waited. In his penthouse office above Seoul, 3 of his most senior men stood along the wall, not breathing. Then a voice came through the line. Calm. Unbothered. Not performing calm, just actually calm. "No. Tae-Ho isyav taitend. I don't think you understand what I understand perfectly," she said. "The answer is no." The line went dead. The room was so quiet that the city outside felt far away. Tae-Ho held the phone for 3 full seconds. Then he set it on the desk with the careful precision of a man choosing not to throw it. "Find everything on her," he said. "Every word she's written. Every person she's ever called source. Everything. If you're new here, welcome. And if this kind of story is what you live for, hit subscribe right now, because we drop stories like this every week. Like this video and drop a comment. Have you ever said no to someone who expected yes? Let's get into this." Her name was Ola. She was 29 years old, an investigative journalist at one of Seoul's mid-sized but fiercely respected independent publications. She had no famous family, no powerful connections, no safety net of any kind. What she had was a wall in her office covered in sticky notes, a highlighter she'd replaced 4 times in 14 months, and a story that was going to matter. It had started with a question no one else thought to ask. Why were construction contracts in 3 separate Seoul districts awarded to 3 apparently unrelated companies, all completing at the exact same cost overrun percentage? Not similar. Exact. Down to the decimal. Ola had noticed it in a budget report she was reading for an entirely different story. She'd set a reminder to come back to it. She came back to it. She kept coming back to it. And slowly, over 14 months of late nights and cold coffee and sources who went quiet without explanation, she had traced every thread back to one name hiding behind 8 layers of corporate structure. LTH Holdings. And behind that, Lee Tae-Ho. She hadn't panicked when she found out who he was. She'd backed up her files in 3 separate locations, written a sealed letter to a friend outside journalism explaining everything, and then gone back to her desk and kept working. She was not fearless. She knew exactly what kind of man she was writing about. But she had made a decision about herself a long time ago, and that decision was not negotiable. The story was true. It mattered. She was going to publish it. The morning after the phone call, she sat across from her editor in his glass-walled office and told him everything. She'd already documented the call, time, duration, every word as she remembered it, filed in writing before she'd slept. Her editor, a careful man in his 50s who had been in this business long enough to recognize the specific weight of certain silences, looked at the document she slid across to him. Then he looked at her. "You know what this means?" "Yes." "It doesn't make threats, Ola. I know what he does." She held his gaze. "Is the story true?" A pause. "Yes." "Does it matter?" Another pause, heavier this time. "Yes." "Then what else is there to discuss?" He leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling, looked back at her. "When can you have the next section ready?" She was already standing. Thursday. Across the city, in a room that cost more per square meter than most people earned a year, Tae-Ho was doing something his men had never seen him do. He was reading. Not reports, not financials, not intelligence summaries. He was reading Ola's published work. From the beginning, her very first byline, a story about illegal waste being dumped in a neighborhood where the residents couldn't afford lawyers, all the way through to her most recent piece 3 weeks ago about underpayment in the care sector. None of it was glamorous. None of it had made her famous. She hadn't chased fame with any of it. She had just written it, found the truth, arranged it carefully, and put it where people could see it. His right-hand man, Shin, entered quietly and waited. She turned down a position at a national outlet 2 years ago, Tae-Ho said, not looking up. 3 times the salary. Yes, sir. She's turned down several offers. There was also a television deal she declined. Why? Shin hesitated. Our contact at her publication says she told them she didn't want to be someone's face. She wanted to keep doing the work. Tae-Ho read another paragraph, set the page down, picked up another. Shin had been with him for 11 years and could read his moods the way other men read weather. Right now, the weather was something Shin had no name for. What does she want? Tae-Ho asked. Career? Recognition? Money? What is she building toward? As far as we can determine, sir. Shin paused carefully. She just wants to write the stories. Tae-Ho looked up for the first time. That's it. That's it. A long silence filled the room. Tae-Ho looked back at the pages in front of him. Something moved across his face, brief, almost unreadable, and then it was gone. Send the offer, he said. Full access. Exclusive interview. Make it something she can't say no to. Shin nodded and left. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that she had already said no once, and that Lee Tae-Ho had never in his life needed to ask twice for anything. The offer arrived the following morning through a formal media request, professionally worded, submitted through one of his legal front companies. Full access to Lee Tae-Ho, an on-the-record sit-down, the kind of exclusive that journalists built entire careers on. Ola read it at her desk, coffee in hand, expression unchanged. She typed her response in 4 sentences, thanked him for the offer, stated she already had what she needed for the story, noted that if Mr. Lee wished to submit an official comment before publication, he was welcome to do so in writing by Friday, confirmed that any statement received would be included exactly as written. She hit send, went back to her notes. When Shin read the response aloud, Tae-Ho sat very still. Then he almost laughed, not with humor, with something that sat just beside it. She already has what she needs, he repeated. Yes, sir. She's telling me the story is finished. It would appear so. He stood and walked to the window. Seoul spread out beneath him, a city of 10 million people, most of whom moved carefully when his name came up. He had shaped things in this city in ways that would never appear in any record. And a 29-year-old journalist with a wall of sticky notes had apparently spent 14 months dismantling what he'd spent 20 years building, and she was telling him about it calmly, in 4 sentences, via a media inquiry form. He made a different kind of call that afternoon. The next week was slow, deliberate pressure, the kind Tae-Ho was known for, the kind that left no fingerprints. One of the publication's major advertising partners went quiet. Not publicly, not dramatically, just suddenly unavailable, emails going unanswered, a contract renewal that had been certain now uncertain. A senior board member of the publication requested a meeting with the editor about editorial direction. 2 of Ola's most reliable sources stopped returning her calls within the same 72 hours. Her editor called her into his office and sat across from her with the expression of a man delivering a diagnosis. He didn't tell her to stop. He was careful not to say that. But he laid out what was happening piece by piece and asked her what she wanted to do. Ola listened to all of it. When he finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Just sat. He could see her processing, not panicking, not performing strength, actually thinking. How long before the advertising situation becomes a real problem? She asked. 6 weeks. Maybe 8. How long to publish if we accelerate? 3 weeks if you can close the remaining sections. She nodded. I'll close them in 2. She went home that night and did not go straight to her laptop. She sat in her apartment in the dark for a while. Let herself feel the weight of it because she was human, not stone, and the pressure had mass. She was tired. She was aware of what she was up against in a way that made her chest feel tight. She called her mother. Didn't say what was wrong. Just needed to hear her voice. Her mother talked about the garden, about the neighbor's new dog, about a television show she'd found. Ordinary things. Ola listened and felt the tightness in her chest slowly loosen. When she hung up, she sat another moment. Then she opened her laptop. She wrote for 4 hours. Now, if this story is already gripping you, and we know it is, this is exactly the moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Tell us in the comments. Would you have published the story? Keep watching because what happens next changes everything. Tae-Ho had read everything she'd ever written. He knew her professional history by memory at this point. He'd had her background examined so thoroughly that he knew more about her than most people knew about themselves. And none of it had given him what he was looking for, a crack, a pressure point, something underneath the composure that he could find and use. There wasn't one. Or, if there was, it wasn't anything he could reach. He made the decision on a Tuesday morning. No entourage, no strategy. He put on clothes that were ordinary, and he went to the coffee shop she frequented, and he sat across from her. Ola looked up from her laptop. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, patient, reading, direct. She didn't startle, didn't reach for her phone, didn't perform anything. "You came alone," she said. "Yes. That's interesting." He sat back. "I wanted to ask you something. Not as a negotiation. I've tried those." The corner of his mouth moved. "You've made your position clear." Several times, she agreed. "I want to understand." He leaned forward slightly. "I have offered you money you'll never see in your lifetime. I've offered you access that would make your career. I've made it clear, without saying it directly, what my reach looks like. And none of it has moved you. I want to understand that." Ola closed her laptop, folded her hands on top of it, looked at him with that unhurried clarity that he had come to find more unsettling than anything else about her. "The story is true," she said. "It involves public money, public contracts, and people who were harmed by decisions made in private. Those people deserve to know what happened. That's the whole thing. There's no more to understand. Everyone has something they want more than." "I want to tell the truth," she said. "I want to do it well, and I want to do it correctly, and I want the people it concerns to be able to read it. That is what I want. Not more than anything, just what I want. It's not complicated." Tae-Ho looked at her for a long moment. Something behind his eyes shifted, small, tectonic, the kind of movement that happens beneath the surface before anyone on the outside notices. "Aren't you afraid of me?" "A beat." "Of course I am," she said quietly. "I've known who you were for 8 months. I know what you've done. I know what people in your position are capable of." A pause. "I'm doing it anyway." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, looked at her one final time, and she held his gaze without effort, the way she always did, because she was exactly who she said she was, and there was nothing to hide and nothing to perform. "I see," he said, quietly, almost to himself. He left. Ola watched him cross the room, step outside, disappear. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. The story published on a Tuesday. 42 pages. 16 verified sources. 8 years of financial records arranged in careful, undeniable order. It was not emotional. It made no dramatic accusations. It simply placed fact beside fact beside fact until the shape of what had been done was impossible to look away from. By noon, it had been shared across every major platform. By evening, 3 government offices had issued statements. By the following morning, 2 of Tae-Ho's front companies had frozen accounts, and his legal team was in emergency session. Ola sat at her desk through all of it, answering calls, directing follow-up journalists to the sourcing appendix, calm as someone who had always known this day was coming and had made peace with it long before it arrived. Her editor stood in her office doorway at some point in the afternoon, just watching her work, and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Across the city, Tae-Ho's world was not ending. He had survived worse than this. He had more resources, more protection, more distance between himself and consequence than almost any other man in his position. But the exposure was real. The investigation that opened officially by end of week was real. And the meeting with 3 of his most powerful allies, men who had never once questioned him in 15 years of doing business together, ended with demands for answers he hadn't been asked to give before. After the room cleared, Tae-Ho sat alone. Shin entered carefully the way he'd been entering rooms lately, slowly, watching. "The investigation is official, sir. As of this morning." Tae-Ho was looking at nothing. "She really did it." "Yes, sir." A long silence. "She really did it." Shin waited for instructions. None came. He withdrew. What came next? Tae-Ho didn't authorize it. Didn't know about it until Shin brought it to him 3 days after the story published, pale-faced, speaking carefully. His Lieutenant Park had made a decision. Park was ambitious and rattled and operating from fear, which was the most dangerous combination Tae-Ho knew. Without clearance, without a word to anyone above him, Park had contracted someone to make Ola disappear. Not to warn her, not to send a message, to end it completely and permanently, framed in his own mind as protecting the organization. Tae-Ho listened to Shin deliver this information without moving. His expression did not change. When Shin finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. Did I authorize this? No, sir. Did anyone? No, sir. What happened next took less than 4 hours. Park was removed from every role he held before the day was out. The contract was canceled with a finality that left absolutely no ambiguity. The person Park had hired received a communication that required no elaboration and left no room for reconsideration. Tae-Ho did not do this for Ola. He did not do it to win anything or reclaim anything or position himself as something he wasn't. He did it because he had decided, somewhere between reading her old stories alone in his office and watching her fold her hands on her laptop and telling the truth was just what she wanted, that some things should not be broken, simply because they shouldn't. There was no strategy in it, just a decision. Ola went home that night the same as any other. Tired, satisfied. She made tea, called her mother, and sat with her notebook and wrote 3 lines about the next story she wanted to chase. She had no idea what had almost happened. No idea it had been stopped. No idea who had stopped it. She was just a woman who had told the truth and was already looking for the next one. Months passed. The investigation moved forward slowly, the way these things always did, bureaucratically, imperfectly, without the drama of a clean ending. Tae-Ho's empire absorbed the damage the way large structures absorb storms, bending, adjusting, remaining upright. His name would carry different weight now in certain rooms. That was permanent. Ola received the award on a Thursday evening in a hall full of people in formal clothes. She wore something simple and stood at the podium without notes. She never needed them, and spoke the way she wrote. Carefully, without performance. She talked about her sources first. The people who had trusted her with their fear because they needed someone to. She talked about her editor, who had held the line when it would have been easier not to. She talked about every journalist who had ever written the story that frightened them most, and done it anyway, and lived with the cost. Then she said, and the room was very quiet when she said it, the most dangerous thing about the truth isn't that people don't want to hear it. It's that they will spend enormous resources trying to convince you it isn't worth the cost. She paused. It is always worth the cost. Every single time. Across the city, in his office, Tae-Ho watched the clip on his phone. City lights behind him. The room empty. He watched it once. Then he went back to the beginning and watched it again. A message came in from a contact. Another journalist, a different publication, had been making inquiries. Early stage. His contact wanted to know if pressure should be applied. The usual quiet kind, no fingerprints. Tae-Ho read the message. Set his phone face down on the desk. Looked at the window. The city was all light and distance and motion, and it didn't answer him. Shin came in, stood near the door. The new inquiry, should we move? A long beat. The longest Shin could remember. No. Shin waited. No elaboration came. He nodded once and left. Tae-Ho stood at the window for a long time. He didn't look like a man who had lost. He looked like a man who had encountered something he didn't have a category for and was still, quietly, privately, with no audience, deciding what to do with what it had shown him about himself. In her office across the city, Ola had a new wall. New sticky notes. New threads she'd been pulling quietly for 2 months already. Her editor passed her doorway and paused. Another one. She didn't look up. Always. She kept writing. And if this story gripped you the way we hoped it would, if Ola reminded you of every time someone underestimated you and got it completely wrong, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Subscribe right now so you never miss a story. Like this video and share it with someone who knows their worth. And drop a comment below. What was the most powerful moment in this story for you? We read every single one. See you in the next story.